I'm so pleased to be here to chat with you today. I am pinch hitting for my colleague Karen Erickson, who unfortunately wasn't able to make it. So I'm happy to be here in her stead. To tell you a little bit about me, I work for a firm here in DC called CRD Associates, where I work with a number of patient advocacy groups, 3 of whom have been involved in PFDD meetings over the last few years. I'm going to focus today on the Alpha 1 story because it was the meeting that was most recent, but there have been 20-some meetings overall. So the point of all of this, as you've now heard a few times over, is for FDA to hear directly from patients and caregivers about what matters to them. So in the Alpha 1 case, we wanted to get as many voices heard as possible. And the challenge, like I'm sure many of the conditions and disorders that folks here represent, is that there's a range of severity. Alpha 1 affects kids differently than it affects adults. There are liver complications, there are lung complications, and so making sure that we had a robust representation of all of the different buckets of Alpha 1 patients and caregivers was our big challenge. And I think, as you can see here, our goal was to fill every seat in the room, to develop a survey to get input from folks who were not able to travel to the FDA to participate in the meeting, and then do some follow-on activities. And I'm thrilled to report that I think the foundation really knocked it out of the park, and so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we were able to do that. It really came down to prioritizing the meeting among all of the foundation activities, pretty significant preparation to anticipate any number of needs, frequent communication with the community on different tracks. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible, and then I just can't underscore how important our collaboration was with FDA to ensure everything went smoothly, and then of course follow up. We had a wonderful day, but you want to make sure that it turns into something. So first was prioritization. This was the #1 priority for the foundation in the months leading up to the meeting. Every single department was involved. It took over the website. We took over support group calls. You could not have been a part of the Alpha 1 community and not heard about this meeting. I think folks were probably sick of hearing about it, which is why they registered, so they would stop getting bothered. So don't underestimate, the value of persistence in signing people up. The foundation has a number of different programs that interact with patients and caregivers, and it was a message across all of them, which I think was really important. I will be honest that the foundation also committed financial resources to helping people travel to DC who may not have been able to otherwise afford it. Lots of folks with Alpha 1 who have lung complications use oxygen as one of their treatments, and so we arranged for an oxygen provider to come to the meeting as well, so folks wouldn't have to worry about literally running out of air as they were sitting there in the room, which required, I'll say, to get permission for someone to bring in these really enormous tanks of oxygen, required a bunch of coordination with FDA, as you might imagine, and it was wonderful that folks were so accommodating. And then there was a whole lot of logistical stuff that folks did, planes, trains, and automobiles. There were 200 plus hotel rooms. The weekend before, there was a big fundraising event on Cape Cod, and so they rented vans to drive people down from the Cape to participate in the meeting. We had shuttle buses to take people from the hotel to the FDA, the oxygen, as I mentioned, 120 airport shuttle rides. It was, thankfully I was not in charge of the logistical part of the meeting, but it was intense to make sure that, people who, some folks are in really good shape physically, other folks, need to be in wheelchairs, need to be in scooters. The logistical challenge of making sure that the broad representation was able to physically be in the room was daunting, but the folks at the foundation just did a wonderful job at that. I think, though, that besides just kind of constantly harassing people for 4 months, the real reason why we were able to get so much involvement in the community is because the community is already engaged on issues of clinical trials, why research is important. The point of the meeting was for FDA to hear directly from patients about their daily lives and what is it like to have alpha-1, what worries you most about it, what treatments are you using that you wish could be improved, in your wildest dreams, what, short of a cure, what sort of treatments might you like. But I think it can be intimidating to think about coming to a meeting at FDA with a bunch of people in dark suits sitting across from you. And so I think the fact that the community was so engaged made the barrier to entry, I'll say, a little bit lower. We did a training about how to tell your story, how to make it concise, be able to, in 2 minutes or less, say, who you are, what your story is, and what's important to you. We also had a dinner the night before the meeting where leadership from the foundation spoke just really to kind of ease people's concerns about what was going to happen the next day. No one was going to be called on. People were really worried about that, I think understandably so. That to be able to empower folks to speak freely, a lot of people said, well, am I really allowed to talk about, I know we have kids in the room, challenges with being on oxygen and how that might affect adult lives. And I think I said that about as diplomatically as possible. Thank you. I'm going to get in trouble for that, I'm sure. But, am I really allowed to talk about that? And I was able to say honestly, absolutely. And it came up a lot the next day, actually. People should have been as free as possible. There was no scripting. I'm in Washington. You want to know what people are going to say. You want to be able to predict, which we could not do, but it was great. So for communication, I've mentioned the real focus was on identifying people from all the different buckets of the community. There was direct outreach to folks. There were several social media campaigns. There were video messages from the founder and CEO, John Walsh, saying, hey, you guys should come. This is going to be really fun. There was the PFDD registration page took over the Alpha-1 website. So if you went to alpha1.org for a couple weeks, you saw this big banner that said, register to come to the patient-focused drug development meeting. It's really important. This slide has a couple of examples. We had a ticker down to the registration deadline and then to the meeting itself. And we just tried to do everything we could to anticipate the questions that people might have to make people feel at ease before they came. And then, of course, by definition, only some parts of the community are able to travel. There were lots of people who, because of illness or disability or their financial situation, weren't able to come to town. And so we also drafted a survey to get as many voices as possible, many voices heard. We took the questions, so other folks who've had PFDD meetings, the FDA publishes the list of questions that they're going to ask patients at the meeting. So it's really easy to prepare, so you know what the discussion will be. We turned those questions into a SurveyMonkey survey. It wasn't super complicated. It wasn't really technically advanced. It was SurveyMonkey, but it was also distributed widely. The one thing that we did then was have different questions once you identified yourself and how you were affected. If you were lung affected only, you just got lung questions versus liver questions about treatments and symptoms and stuff like that. So it was kind of personalized based on your experience. And I was floored that we got 1,600 people to complete this survey, which was extraordinary. I think it goes to show how much patients, caregivers, people affected by conditions want to tell their stories. I mean, that's why you guys are all here, right? So I think, The FDA is going to have future PFDD meetings, and they've put some instructions on their website for how folks, even if it's not an official FDA meeting, how folks can hold similar meetings internally. But I would really encourage you to, if that feels like a lot to take on, and talking about oxygen and hotel rooms and stuff, I maybe dissuaded you. But I would encourage you to consider doing a survey if you haven't already, because I think it's a pretty low-cost way to hear from people. And then most importantly was collaboration. I mean, I can't underscore how important that was. I want to publicly thank Jennifer Sharp and Barbara Cass, who were the two folks at FDA we worked with. We had conference calls with them weekly. I sent them about 1 million emails because folks were really worried. So if I have to go through security, what if I can't get out of my wheelchair? What will happen then? What if I can't take off my oxygen? Making sure security was anticipating. We literally had a bus pull up and drop 200 people off at one time so that they knew that we'd all be coming at once and that folks may not be able to walk through the metal detector. Bringing oxygen in was key. People wanted to know, mobility is a real challenge for some of our folks. So from when I get off the bus to when I sit in my chair in the room, how long will that take me? How many steps is it? Is there a bathroom along the way? What if I need to rest between when I get off the bus? People had a lot of logistical concerns, and the folks at FDA were really wonderful about helping us to ease people's fears. The punchline is the room looked much like this. It was totally packed, standing room only. I had to actually stand the whole time because there weren't enough chairs. We had a couple hundred people participate online as well. I think most of the PFDD meetings have followed this structure, but the idea was that they're facilitated panel presentations like this, and then facilitated discussions about the effects of alpha-1 that matter most, and perceptions of current treatment. What are people doing to treat their symptoms now? How do they wish it would be better? And because the FDA knew that we had done the survey, they gave us the opportunity to present some of the initial survey data after the presentations as well. So the idea was to have it be as robust as possible. We had teed up Dr. Sandy Stanhouse, who's the foundation's medical director, to sign up to speak in the public comment period at the end of the day, thinking, we couldn't script anything, but he could have a handful of things that he could make sure to mention just in case it didn't come up in the conversation. And everything we could have anticipated came up, which of course isn't surprising. If it's, what matters most to people with alpha-1, who better experts than affected people themselves. Okay, the only thing I'll mention, because I think I'm running out of time, is that we submitted the survey, and we did statistical analysis, but we also pulled a bunch of quotes from participants, respondents as well, which I think kind of underscores, you can see a bunch of tables and numbers can be compelling, but hearing, again, directly, in people's voices, what they're worried about, what their lives are like, I think was really important. So the big question is what comes next? We had this meeting last fall, a report will be generated, but we have had one follow-up meeting, and it was exactly the way Dr. Rao described. We requested to meet with folks to talk at FDA to talk about liver studies, why they're so important. People with the liver symptoms of alpha-1 really don't have any treatments. And as she said, we did like 95% of the talking, and the FDA mostly listened. But again, just having an opportunity to underscore, based on everything folks heard at our meeting, what are the policy things they should consider, was the goal. So this is a picture of a bunch of our speakers. I know that folks who were there found it really empowering that folks from FDA wanted to hear so directly from them. I will say you'll see that we have a bunch of purple buttons. Everyone had a big metal button that said, "I'm an alpha-1 advocate," which we gave out the night before, and of course they all set off the metal detector. So I stood on the other side of 200 people like, take off the button, take off the button. So if you're gonna hand out buttons, I would encourage you to do it once you're after security. Okay, and with that.